When 4 aircraft carriers sank in seconds, Japan's military elite faced an impossible truth. Shock, desperation, the weight of defeat crushing their empire's destiny. Why did admirals choose death over explanation? How did the public never learn what really happened? What secret decision changed everything for Japan's future? The answer reveals a nation on the edge of collapse.
The moment of collapse. June 1942. Japan's Navy ruled the Pacific Ocean. Their aircraft carriers were floating fortresses, unsinkable, unstoppable. Then, everything changed in seconds. 4 massive carriers went down. Thousands of sailors and pilots vanished beneath the waves. The men who commanded Japan's military sat in stunned silence. They stared at maps showing empty spaces where their ships used to be. These weren't just vessels, they were the heart of Japan's power. The pilots lost couldn't be replaced. The ships couldn't be rebuilt fast enough. Japan's leaders realized something terrifying. They had just lost the war. Not immediately, but the path forward had disappeared. The question nobody wanted to ask hung in the air. What were these leaders going to do now? Would they admit the truth? Would they accept responsibility? Or would they do something far darker? The answer would shock the entire nation. Admiral Yamamoto's private despair. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was Japan's greatest naval commander. He had planned Midway. He believed it would destroy America's navy and win the war. But the plan had failed spectacularly. When the terrible news reached him, Yamamoto withdrew from everyone around him. He became silent and dark. Former colleagues said he looked like a broken man. Privately, Yamamoto made a decision that revealed his character. He accepted full responsibility for the disaster. He didn't blame his officers. He didn't make excuses. He told his staff that he and only he would deliver the truth to Emperor Hirohito. He would shoulder the blame personally. This wasn't political maneuvering, it was honor in the face of catastrophe. But here's what makes this fascinating. Even this great leader's integrity couldn't change what came next. The cover-up had already begun.
The breaking point of command. Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka was the chief of staff for another commander, Admiral Nagumo. He watched the battle unfold in real time, powerless to stop the catastrophe. When the final reports came in, all 4 carriers lost. Kusaka's emotional walls collapsed. He later wrote something raw and honest. "I felt bitter. I felt like swearing." These weren't the words of a stoic warrior. These were the words of a man watching his nation's future burn. He watched pilots he knew personally never return. He watched ships carrying thousands of young sailors slip beneath the ocean. The weight of helplessness crushed him. But there was one officer whose response was even more dramatic. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi stood on the deck of his sinking ship and chose death over survival. He refused rescue boats. He went down with the Hiryu, taking responsibility in the only way honor allowed. But not everyone embraced responsibility like Yamaguchi did. The lie begins, the victory announcement. While Yamamoto and his officers faced their despair privately, something shocking happened publicly. Japan's high command announced to the entire nation that Midway was a great victory. Think about that. 4 carriers lost, thousands of sailors dead, and the government told people they had won. The propaganda machine worked overtime. At the exact same moment as the Midway battle, Japanese forces captured the Aleutian Islands, a remote chain in Alaska. The government used this as a distraction. "Look what we captured," the newspapers screamed. "Japan is winning." The public believed it because they had no reason not to. But how did the government keep people from learning the truth? How did they silence the survivors? The answer reveals a darker side of power, a system so desperate to maintain control that it would imprison its own soldiers. The cover-up went further than anyone imagined. Quarantining survivors, silencing the truth. Wounded sailors and airmen came back from Midway. They had stories. They had seen what really happened. They knew Japan had lost. So, the High Command did something chilling. They locked these survivors away. Wounded sailors were labeled secret patients and placed in isolated hospital wards. Airmen were confined to remote bases. Families couldn't visit. Civilians couldn't talk to them. The government had essentially imprisoned its own fighting men, not as punishment, but as control. These soldiers who had survived the battle were now trapped in a different kind of prison. They watched the newspapers lie about what they had experienced. They heard the government celebrate a victory they knew was a defeat. Some tried to tell their families the truth, but communications were monitored. The isolation was complete. Think about the psychology of this. Men who lived through the horror of battle were now told they must keep silent, must pretend everything was fine while their nation celebrated a lie. But the cover-up went even higher into the military itself.
Deception of the Army. Military secrets. Here's something almost unbelievable. The Japanese Navy kept the truth so secret that they even lied to their own army. Japan had two military branches, the Navy and the Army. They didn't always trust each other or share information. After Midway, the Navy kept the disaster completely hidden from the Army's leadership. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo was one of the most powerful men in Japan, yet he claimed he didn't find out the full extent of the catastrophe until an entire month after the battle. Let that sink in. The Prime Minister of Japan didn't know the truth about one of the war's most important battles for 30 days. The Navy had compartmentalized the information so carefully that even the highest levels of government were kept in the dark. This wasn't just secrecy, it was an entire system designed to control information and protect the Navy's reputation at any cost. Only one person knew everything: the Emperor Hirohito himself. Emperor Hirohito's response: the impossible choice. Emperor Hirohito was informed of the truth on June 8, 1942, just days after the battle ended. Unlike the Prime Minister and the public, the Emperor knew exactly how catastrophic the loss was. He understood the 4 carriers were irreplaceable. He knew the experienced pilots couldn't be replaced. He grasped that Japan's path to victory had closed. So what did he do? His response was carefully calculated and deeply revealing. He told his commanders that yes, the losses were regrettable, but, and this was the crucial part, the Navy's morale must not be allowed to drop. In other words, the Emperor was saying, keep lying, protect the system, maintain the illusion. The Emperor himself was endorsing the cover-up. He understood that honesty might break the nation's will to fight, so he chose preservation of morale over truth. But this decision came with a hidden cost that would reshape everything. The lie couldn't hold the strategy together for long. Strategic shifts, the silent admission of defeat. Publicly, Japan's leaders continued claiming they were winning. They talked about future offensives, they promised victory. But behind closed doors, everything changed. The High Command quietly shifted from offense to defense. They canceled planned attacks on New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa. They stopped planning large-scale mobile operations. In essence, they admitted to themselves that they had lost. Japan spent the rest of the war fighting defensive battles, trying to delay defeat rather than achieve victory. The men who had watched their empire's moment of triumph turn into catastrophe now spent years managing the slow collapse. They never recovered from Midway. The lie protected national morale in the short term, but it prevented honest strategic planning. Japan fought on for 3 more years in battles they couldn't win, losing more and more until surrender came. The cover-up didn't change destiny, it only delayed the reckoning and cost more lives. Sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is cheaper than the lie that follows. The Battle of Midway defeat shattered everything Japan believed about victory. When the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu vanished beneath the waves, the Japanese High Command faced an impossible reckoning. What Japan said after Midway wasn't truth, it was calculated deception. Yamamoto Midway quotes revealed a broken commander accepting responsibility while his nation built walls of lies. The Midway carrier's sunk reaction from Tokyo's leadership exposed a system more concerned with saving face than saving lives. 3 years of defensive battles followed. The cover-up didn't change destiny, it only delayed the inevitable. History shows us that silence amplifies catastrophe. Subscribe for more untold stories of decisions that changed everything.